think she's starting to.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the board meeting tonight. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. When you joined, you heard as an audience member that you are in listen-only mode. You cannot unmute yourself. However, now I am able to unmute you so you can speak for public comment. If you'd like to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand function to indicate to me that you would like to speak, and I will unmute you so you can do so. The raise your hand function is shown by a little hand icon on your screen. Please know your webcam will remain off, so your comment will be audio only. And now I'll turn things over to President Coyne to begin the meeting.
Thank you, Margaret. I am calling to order the regular meeting of the Park Ridge Park District Board of Park Commissioners. Today is Thursday, April 15th, 2021, and it is 7:01 p.m. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Grau?
Here.
Commissioner Harrington?
Here.
Commissioner Leduc?
Here.
Commissioner Leach?
Here.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Tunnell?
Here.
Commissioner Coyne?
Here. Thank you. Would anyone like to amend, add, or delete an item to the current agenda? Hearing none. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on any non-agenda item?
I don't have anybody raising their hand.
Great, thank you. I now move to approve the regular board meeting minutes of Thursday, March 18th, 2021 and Thursday, April 1st, 2021. This action will be formally ratified in an actual board meeting with physical presence at a later date.
Second.
Any discussion on that? Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Grau?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington?
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc? Yes. Commissioner Leach?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell?
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne?
Aye. I now move to approve the closed meeting minutes as identified in Exhibit A and maintain these minutes in the closed meeting records of the Park Ridge Park District, finding good cause exists to maintain them as confidential. This action will be formally ratified in an actual board meeting with physical presence at a later date. Second. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Harrington?
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc?
Yes.
Commissioner Leach?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell?
Yes.
Commissioner Grau?
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to reports of park officials, and I get to go first. I don't have much to say except that there was an election held a couple of weeks ago, and we're looking at a pretty close race right now. It is yet to be counted, and I just want to say that I'm looking forward to working with whoever the new board is going to be. So with that, I'll just look to our next report, which is our attorney. And Dirk, are you available? Oh, yes, you are. I see you there.
Good evening. I've got nothing special to report because despite our best efforts to prompt people like IDPH for some clarity on our water and some consistency among their guidance, that's not forthcoming. So staff is doing an unbelievable job of navigating the shoals, I would say, of the competing factions that want more masks or no masks, and how we run our program. We're doing the best we can. Nobody's happy, and we're not getting answers out of Springfield, but we're going to keep after it. I've talked to Jason about it, and we're hoping for some real answers on water. The good news is, I haven't confirmed this with Gail or finance, but the question is, They've sent out the bills for everybody's water permits. So I think that's a good indication that they're going to allow us to open. So that's all I got.
Thank you. And then I'll turn the floor over to Executive Director Mountcastle.
Thank you very much. Everybody hear me? I will continue on the COVID theme that our attorneys started. Staff met this week to deal with one of the caveats that was put in one of the latest guidelines about counting, or I should say not counting fully vaccinated people in capacity limits. After reviewing the communication from PDERMA and talking through, all the various scenarios, we decided that we are not going to be following, we're not going to be allowing the fully vaccinated people to not be counted. So for example, we could increase capacity at some of our areas if we monitored who's vaccinated and who's not. The logistics is the main reason that we are not going to be at this time, unless something major changes with their guidance. But in terms of trying to manage that and keep the records and privacy issues that we've been not warned about, but yeah, kind of warned about, that could be a big problem. But mainly the logistics in terms of we'd have to add a lot of staff to have different lines and counting all over buildings, and it's just really not feasible at this time. It seems to be what most park districts are following as well. The forging of the vaccine cards was brought up as an issue and a problem. How liable will we be if we accept cards that aren't valid? So that's where we're at with that right now. Is there any questions on that or any concerns with that path by anybody? No. Okay, thank you. So we did look at that. Again, as Dirk said, we're waiting for more clarity. They came out with some all sports guideline changes this week as well. So I think that was just yesterday. So we're reviewing those in terms of how that applies to us, to the affiliates, and for all of the camps and different programs that we're running. So staff will be evaluating and applying it as necessary once we get through all the various paperwork and guidelines on that. So I think that was what I had on COVID. If anybody has any questions, I can answer that. If not, I wanted to move on to the fireworks, as I communicated to the board this week, and it was discussed at the city council as well this week about, unfortunately, having to cancel the fireworks. As we stated, we put it in the budget. We were very hopeful and optimistic that we were going to be able to make that work. Unfortunately, there's many contracts that have to be signed before months in advance, one in particular 3 months in advance. And so the decision had to be made. It was made as a group between the city and the park district and the school district that it's just not feasible with what we know now. And the issue is that we're still in phase 4, and the fireworks are 3 months away. And we looked at all different scenarios and alternatives to run them in phase 4 or in the bridge phase. And it just none of the options we looked at were going to work in terms of managing that big of a crowd. And that's really the issue here, is that not knowing what we're going to be facing. We looked at, watching fireworks in your cars, which several park districts have done events like that. Or doing the circles, and then, people can be in their circles and have limited attendance. The problem is that event will bring people out to other ancillary parks. I mean, we could shoot off the fireworks and then not have Main East open. However, people are going to come out, and the crowds are going to be there no matter what. If we just let cars there, they're going to come to the site anyway. So the consensus was, unless we're in phase 5, that it was not feasible to be able to run them, and that we would look at potentially, doing something later in the year. Logistically, that could be a little tough, but we said maybe for a New Year's Eve or, along with another event. But we're not quite sure, that that's going to happen, but we're leaving ourselves open to that. And on that note, we did look at some, alternatives and wanted to talk to the board for a minute about, utilizing a portion of that money for other events that we had removed from the budget. And now that we know we're not having the fireworks this summer, we wanted to just run this by the board and make sure there's no major objections. I was going to have April jump in and talk a little bit about what we were thinking there.
Sure. Of course, with the fireworks being canceled for July 3rd as of now, and I know you all felt our pain while we were pulling all of those events from the budget just to meet a certain point. But in looking back and just brainstorming with the team, we think, even if we use about half of the money that we budgeted for the fireworks, without knowing whether or not we'd be able to have them later in the year, we wouldn't necessarily want to, use the full amount, and with knowing that we'd potentially be coming back to the board if the fireworks become a possibility. But at a minimum, with using about half of what's budgeted for the fireworks, we could potentially do 2 concerts, 2 movies in the park, 2 children's concerts at Prospect like we've done in the past, and then, trying to do something at the Nature Center as well, whether it's a different version of the Country Farm Fair or, something else at the Nature Center. These are things that are much more manageable as far as the fireworks and things that, we've gotten through so many events and smaller things in phase 4 that it's definitely doable having people register and spacing things out. We've already spaced out, we did this last year in the hopes that we could do a concert at South Park. So we've already started looking at those types of things, and, staff is really hoping to bring some of these things back to the community when the fireworks is such a great event, but it's so far reaching. And this would be, bringing some things back to the community. And if we're back in phase 5, in July or August, then we can open it up to all. So that's initially what the team was thinking. We're looking at possibly doing one of the concerts and some smaller things on Friday, July 2nd. So it'd still be something for the community over the holiday weekend. And, the creative team, they have lots of other smaller ideas as well. But those are the big ones that we think we could pull off.
That sounds great. Sounds like a lot of fun events. The fireworks event, I just want to say, the fireworks is a fun event, but it's also symbolic of a very special day in our country's history. And I would like to see that. So doing the fireworks, to me, later on in the year or whenever, is kind of, that's fine if you want to do it, if that's going to be a fun event for everybody. But there are other fun events, like you just outlined, that would be maybe better use if we're not going to be able to celebrate Independence Day on or around Independence Day. So the one thing that I would like to suggest, just personally, I didn't ask for consensus from the board or anything on this, but is if we can look at events on that day. You said that there might be some things, but something that is specific to paying honor to the birth of our country. So I don't know what that is because I'm not creative, but that's what the day is for. That's what the fireworks are supposed to be signifying. And I would like to see if we can't do a fireworks big event, if some of these smaller events couldn't at least be in a happy birthday United States sort of mode. So those are just my comments on the whole thing.
I think our idea with the concert would we tie that in, on that week, on that date. We were thinking Friday, the holiday is rougher for getting staff and overtime. So we were thinking on the 2nd. It's always on the 3rd, so it's not technically on the 4th anyway. So I think we were thinking the 2nd would work.
Well, and because historically the concerts have been on Friday nights,
Friday
which is
nights.
leaning towards the Friday. And the Fine Arts Society was also hoping they could do something in the summer. They haven't selected a date, so there would be some coordination with them as well on which dates we would do which concert. So that's also part of why we were leaning towards the Friday. That's kind of been the concert day in the past years, to try and go with that tradition a little bit. But I don't know that we're completely attached to Friday. If we could find somebody to come out on that date.
On that weekend, from my point of view, it wasn't about the exact day. It's about the theme of the event.
Mm-hmm.
So if if you have a concert where you're playing, I guess, patriotic music, for lack of a better term, or Americana music, then that's great, and it can be on Friday or on it can be on the second, third, or fourth. I'm not saying that. I just want to make sure that that's what the holiday's about, and so we should at least have some sort of recognition of that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Amy and Julie had all sorts of ideas, making it patriotic theme with no matter what we did during that time frame. Yeah, they're talked about having some contests and different things that go along with that.
So thank you, April. I think that was all I had, unless there's any other questions for me on general things, COVID, or the marketing, or the HR report. Questions? Okay.
Okay. Then where do we go? I'm sorry, I just lost my
I think
finance. I turned the
we all just want to hear from Superintendent DeAngelis. We just skate through to get to the dollars here in finances. So I will turn it over to Superintendent DeAngelis to walk us through any questions on the written finance report, our monthly report by funds, and then our ongoing COVID-19 financial projections.
Thank you. Good evening. The written finance report begins on page 14 of your packet, and I would like to highlight a few things. We expect to present the final 2020 annual report with Lauterbach and Amen at the next board meeting on May 6th. Then under information technology, I'd like to point out that we submitted a proposal for funding a video surveillance system replacement with the House Committee on Appropriations Community Project Initiative. And I will review the highlights of the financial results to date during the monthly report by funds. And in the meantime, I'm happy to answer any questions on the written report. Okay, if there are no questions, then I will move on to the monthly report by funds. Beginning with the treasurer's report on page 18, it shows our cash and investment position at the end of March was 11 million. As we will see in the projection graph, this is lower than budget projections by about 1.2 million. This is attributable to a variance in the timing of tax and recreation cash receipts, largely driven by last year's camp registration occurring in February. So we received all of that cash, and that when we do the projections, we reflect the same historical timing. So that showed more recreation receipts coming budgeted at that time than has actually happened. Property tax receipts were about 200,000 lower than budgeted through March 31st. We did see a little bit larger than typical distribution the first week of April, so I'm continuing to monitor that closely. So the portfolio reports on the following 3 pages reflect little change in the portfolio yield to maturity compared to the prior month. Then on page 22, we begin the monthly report by funds.
Sandra, can I just stop you for 1 second?
Certain.
It
Sure.
looks like on our investments, pretty soon we're going to be paying them for holding our money. I mean, those interest rates are just crazy low.
They are, and that's the current environment. So, you know, we'll have to see how the economic rebound affects that.
Yeah. Those were nice short investments. Hopefully it'll go up, right?
That's what I'm hoping, but it may take a while.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, the first page of the fund report shows all funds, and the total net surplus is below budget by about $626,000, and it's lower than the prior year by $2.1 million. So the variance versus budget is largely driven by recreation operations, while the variance from the prior year is largely attributable to the bonds that we issued in February of 2020. And you can see that more clearly in the individual fund pages as we move through the reports. The next page in the general fund, we are below budgeted revenues due to the variance in timing of property tax receipts that we talked about, while expenses continue to be below both budget and the prior year. So the variance in revenues compared to the prior year is larger, and it's due to shifting some of the property taxes to the recreation fund per the budget. So as you might remember, in order to rebalance the general fund surplus generated in 2020, the tax levies were adjusted for this purpose. So I just wanted to point that out. And the resulting net surplus to date of $2.2 million, it's better than budget by about $93,000, and it's lower than the prior year by $620,000. So the bigger variance compared to the prior year is mostly because of that shift in revenues. Moving on to the recreation fund, the recreation revenues remain low at about 50% of the budgeted amount. However, following the pattern we've experienced in 2020, expenses are also lower, currently about 56% of budgeted. The next page is our capital fund. And as I mentioned on the all funds page, you can see here that the variance in surplus compared to the prior year is mostly due to the higher revenues in 2020 because of that bond issuance. So lastly, looking at the operating fund on page 26, I'd like to highlight that through March, we've received 92% of budgeted property taxes, which is about $200,000 less than budgeted. Now, after the distribution we received the first week of April, the same calculation resulted in tax receipts of 94% of the amount budgeted through April. So we do typically receive another distribution at the end of the month. So I'm hopeful that that will bring us closer to the budgeted amount. We'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. We also typically get some property taxes in May, although usually smaller amounts, but if everything's kind of delayed because of the pandemic situation, you know, there's still an opportunity to kind of get closer to what we would have expected. So again, we continue to monitor that really closely. This report also shows that operating results to date are about $380,000 better than budgeted and about $680,000 lower than this time last year. Right. So the next report by funds report is the fund balance projection report that shows actual March and projected revenues and expenses according to the budget. So before we move on to the projection scenarios, I'd like to invite you to ask me questions about the monthly report. Awesome. So the projection graph on page 28 shows our estimated position looking forward through February of 2022, as budgeted and as well as under the moderate and stress scenarios. So I've updated that moderate scenario to expect that 94% of property tax receipts compared to the budget is what we receive going forward through the end of the year. Previously, when we've looked at this scenario, it was at 98%. So I also made adjustments for the expense assumptions in both scenarios to align with the 21 budget per Commissioner O'Donnell's comments at our last meeting. So again, just as a reminder, the dashed budget line is an estimated cash position based on the 2021 budget. The green line is the projected budgeted fund balance, measuring our performance going forward. The yellow and red lines represent those moderate and stress cases respectively. And again, we continue to make adjustments as more information becomes available. Does anyone have questions on the projection scenarios? Well, with that, then I will turn it back over to Commissioner Harrington. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the approval of expenditures. I move to approve for payment vouchers in the total amount of $327,407.28. This action will be formally ratified at an actual board meeting with physical presence at a later date. May I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Commissioner Grau. Any questions? Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne.
Aye.
And that concludes the finance section of the meeting. So Commissioner Grau with Recreation.
Thank you. Okay, April, you ready to take it away to the fun stuff?
Sure. My report begins on page 33, and I'll give you a few highlights of the fun events that some of the fun events we've held for the holidays, the leprechaun hunt and the bunny visits with the bunny baskets. Staff continue to try and, enjoy the holidays and do some of the events as they can. Camp registration, that was last week. I thought people would like to see some of what happened last week, and we do have an increase in enrollment, obviously compared to last year, with some significant wait lists, as you may have noticed. So staff is working diligently to try and be creative with space and looking at camps that haven't filled and are going to be accommodating as many of the waitlist participants as we possibly can. So that's the good news compared to last year, is we're definitely seeing more participation. As you can see throughout the report, while numbers aren't as they've been in the past, throughout we're seeing an increase compared to past months. Camp Ridge held its last day, and Beyond the Bell is back in all 5 schools at this point. And we've, as you can see, the athletic participation is very strong. Our Wildwood Nature Center, while it's not noted here, we did just open the facility back up for visitors with restrictions, of course. The active adults took their first trip. While it was a very small group, it's been their first trip since last year in February. And so there's definitely been, while it's a slow growth, they're inching up with participation each month, and some of the other trips are moving forward this month as well. And our fitness center, including the indoor pool, we still see steady participation. While there's definitely people who are still canceling, we're still getting members in, new members, and memberships that are coming back as people are getting vaccinated. So holding steady and moving forward is our theme, I think. You know, it's, well, some of the information that Sandra, you know, the 50% revenue, we also have to remember that January, we had another kind of a shutdown. So we went backwards in mitigation. So for some programs, we took a step back in January and resumed in February 1st. So just wanted to remind everyone of that as well. But I'd be happy to answer any questions about the report or.
Commissioner Coyne?
Great report. It looks like things are going great. I'm really pleased with all of that. I had a question about Beyond the Bell participation, just because it's not in here and I can't recall. How do the numbers look compared to like pre-pandemic numbers in terms of participation in these classes? Like, I don't know what typical participation would be at this time of year for Beyond the Bell.
Yeah, like not even close. I mean, a fraction of our participation. You know, we talked about that when it makes sense to, it's very hard to report because we're still taking registration in a different manner Beyond the Bell, just in case the mitigations change again. We're keeping it with a Monday, Tuesday, then Wednesday and Thursday, Friday registration. Just because in case they move backwards and have to go back to part-time, then we wouldn't have to switch our registration system again. So we can try and include some sort of comparison. That's what we tried to do with the camps compared to last year. But if I had to take a guess, I mean, it's 10% of the registration that we've seen.
Over 1,000, right?
Yeah. Pre-pandemic, yeah.
Yeah, I asked, well, you answered the question perfectly, and it explained something, because part of the low participation is because you're limited in what you're doing. It isn't that there isn't demand out there necessarily. It's that you can only, you're under your own restrictions, as you just indicated. So that explains a lot. And I was just curious. I wasn't criticizing or anything. I just didn't know what the numbers were. And I'm expecting that people are going to be clamoring to use Beyond the Bell once things sort of straighten out and we get back into phase 5 or whatever. But
yes, we would assume that as well. And what staff is hearing is that people have, you know, there's so many families still have a parent working from home or have their daycare or babysitters figured out at this point, because of all of the unknowns and so many things shifting. And so that's what, you know, Robin and Amy and Julie are hearing from parents, that, yeah, as soon as we know that we're stable and things are back to, there's no risk of us moving backwards, then we're all in.
Is that all? Any other questions? As usual, thank you for constantly changing and updating and keeping everyone interested in our programming. Hopefully that will come to an end someday soon.
Oh, I think there's another question.
Where?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
It's hard to see you guys.
Hold on, April.
Commissioner Ledoux?
Yes, I just wanted to comment. Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, it's been nice seeing with my own kids returning to programs, and I thought it was really great that the karate program was able to actually hold a belt testing. That was really kind of like an exciting thing to see these kids actually get to advance after all their work, both in Zoom classes and in then getting to go back to in-person things. Looking at the facility rentals, I was wondering, since we are going to be opening more pool facilities, do you see pool rentals for parties as being a thing again this summer, or is it just too soon to be able to predict?
We're talking about pool rentals, and we're trying to finalize the schedules and the time slots for reservations. We're in one of the final proofs of getting those out to the public, hopefully, and we were waiting a little bit just to see if if IDPH would come out with anything new. We were afraid we put it out and then IDPH would change something, but we do currently have time slots for rentals at all facilities in our plans.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's exciting. Anyone else? I'm watching. Okay, I don't see anything else. I'm turning it over probably for the last time to Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah, that's a bittersweet turnover there, Commissioner Grau. I was just thinking about that. So anyway, I yield to Superintendent Wolf to take us through his building and grounds report.
Thank you. I have my report is on page 41 of the PDF, or 40 if you're following in a paper packet. I do want to first highlight and re-congratulate both Oscar Salgado and Glenn Nance. Both of them have been with the district for a while, and with a reorganization, they have taken on a little expanded role. So we think that's really going to help the district as we go forward, and I know the rest of the staff in our department are excited about this change. We've been very busy with all these projects that we spent the last several months talking about, so I've got no memos to back this report up with today, thankfully. But I do have one item that was not on the list here that I did want to just make the board aware of, in that last night I attended a town hall meeting with a group of homeowners as well as the Park Ridge Police, and I had invited Pastor Hoffman and one of his associates from St. Andrew's Church. We met with some homeowners near Hinckley Park along Morris Avenue just to discuss some of the recent gatherings of kids and vandalism, and just have some discussion as a group of how we can work together and how we have been working together over the past several weeks. And the meeting went really well. Everyone at the meeting was very complimentary of the Park District's role, and we reaffirmed how we're going to be working together with the police department to continue to look at this issue. And they were all very appreciative of that. So, but with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has on any other parts of my board report.
Anybody? Well, hearing none, I turn it over to Commissioner Tunnell.
Thank you, sir. We actually had a chance to review some of the financial policies. There's a memo in the packet on page 41, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Superintendent DeAngelis to discuss.
Thank you, Commissioner Tunnell. As he mentioned, and as the memo explains, I just wanted to remind everyone of kind of where we are with our financial policies. That a number of years ago, when we were updating the administrative policy manual, we recommended that all the policies related to finance be organized in a finance policy that ultimately I'd like to incorporate into the budget document and review annually as part of the budget process. So the board approved the first several sections, purpose, objectives, review, financial planning, and revenues. The remaining sections that I aim to complete this year are expenses, fund balance, internal controls, and risk management, and accounting, auditing, and financial reporting. So as we were implementing the new purchasing card program, I wanted to complete the update to the district's purchasing policy. And the purchasing policy is within the expense section, and a draft of both the expense and fund balance sections are included in the packet for your review and for discussion tonight. Legal counsel has reviewed, as well as Commissioner Harrington and Commissioner Tunnell. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I included a marked copy as well as a clean copy so you could see what changes we're proposing. If there's anything you'd like me to highlight or explain.
I have one really small thing, and I'm not sure if it's just the way I'm reading it, but on page 42 in the packet, where it talks about new capital projects will be reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
You added the word "and" input from the community and neighbors surrounding affected parks and/or facilities. It implied to me that we would. But before that, it says based upon some or all of the following criteria. I read it the first time through as this is a list of some or all. But then when you put the word "and" in, it implies to me that we would have to get public input on every single action we took that's how I read the "and." But maybe I'm just reading. Maybe it's just a list of things, and these are the things, and it refers back. I don't know if it's a grammatical thing or.
The intent was that these are things that could be evaluated. So I can work on trying to make that more clear.
I just don't want it to.
Sure.
I don't want it to come up that we have to, for every small little thing that we do, that we'd have to have a public hearing on it.
Maybe it should be or
whatever.
I'll take a look at that and see if we can clean it up.
You were wonderful about making yourself available this week, but I'm saving my question now for the meeting since I wasn't able to connect with you. But I had a question around professional services and the changes there to expand the categories of services that are allowed without RFP to be expanded upon. And I know it references the Act. I didn't get a chance to kind of look up the Act. I think we still have our attorney here. You know, I think we always want to make sure that we have the best service at the best price for the district. So I'm just wanting to understand a little bit more about the expansion of those categories for which we can just extend work without RFP.
Okay.
Well, that's what the park code permits you to do based upon what it provides and based upon legislative findings you make. So forever people quoted only the first 3/4 of what the park code says, but the park code actually gives you broader categories, and the park code has not kept up with technology. There's a myriad of software providers and other technical services that aren't really reflected. I mean, it talks about telephones and telesystems, and it's way behind. And that's why we backstop it with legislative findings by you all. As when you deem it appropriate, we can move on from competitive bidding to doing competitive proposals or not proposals at all. The other part is that only 3 things require a beauty pageant, a quality-based selection process. And those 3 are architects, engineers, and land surveyors. Everything else is up to you how you would like to pick among professional services or services that require a requisite amount of skill. For example, typically park districts hire people who do signage without going through a bid process, because that's a matter of style, technique, and artistic skill. So as the number of kinds of services that the park districts have required have gone up, we want to make sure everybody understands that the board has more power to make findings to say, in these particular circumstances, we're going to do away with the competitive bidding, and we're going to engage in a different process. Lastly, that's also important because for things that are typically fungible and readily bid in the marketplace, but because of timing or because of commitments we've made in other respects, for example, maybe we've done something in an intergovernmental agreement and now we don't have, because of the intergovernmental, the flexibility we might otherwise have to choose among different kinds of vendors. So sometimes our equipment suppliers, we narrow them to the same sets of equipment we're sharing with others. And so we need to take it out. We're not going to accept a Toro bid because we're wed to, you know, John Deere or something like that. So again, to match all of the different needs where you're stewarding the resources of the park district, we wanted to make sure the purchasing policy reflected the full breadth of your powers.
That's helpful. So for professional services like banking, bond, legal, no offense, do some districts have policies in place that kind of require, like hold the onus on them to review those types of contracts on a set number of year basis?
Typically, only the auditor it does that, because they say the best practice is you swap out your auditor every 6 years, and so that's built into financial policies. But in terms of overall review, you know, one of the appointments that's typically considered and made every year when you organize the board for who's president and all the rest include things like the attorney of the park district. So we're reminded on the calendar to be reviewed. But there's not typically a policy about our contract. Our engagement letter is really just about our rates, and the scope is as you ask us to do things. So, but we
are extremely happy with your services. I am. So I wasn't meaning to insinuate that, but I know in my time on the board, we have done a financial services review. We have done a legal review. And I think those are really important things to have in the normal course of our district. So I just wasn't sure if this was an opportunity for the board to think about that type of a policy going forward, if we're making these changes now, and if this would be the appropriate place to do it.
I would say that this would be the appropriate place to do it, and now would be the time if we would want to include more specific parameters. I do want to point out we do have professional services policy on selection included starting on page 48 of that marked copy that, you know, talks about the architects, engineers, services. It also talks about the that the auditor will be reviewed at the end of the term of each contract, and it also includes the parameters under which we would review legal counsel, which are very broad. We're not, one of the things, you know, we want to think carefully about when we're setting policy. Do we want to be broad so that we have flexibility, or do we want to have more strict parameters to really hold us to things, and, you know, what could be the consequences there? So but this would be the place to do that if we wanted to include other financial firms, et cetera.
I know that go ahead, Commissioner Gross, sorry.
I was going to say I had the same concern because we had talked about renewing the legal, we're reviewing our legal agreement every year, I believe in the past, when we brought up how long had it been that we changed. So we've had those discussions, And I think rather than saying it, you can do it, I think it'd be recommended to do it at some, maybe not every year, but I think it would be recommended to go through, to at least say that you do or do not want to go through a review.
So right now it reads that when and if not less than a majority of the board members determine that the district's legal counsel relationship should be reviewed. That's when a majority of board members think it needs to happen.
That's awkward. That means that you got to the place where you're unhappy, and so you want to review it.
Or enough time has elapsed and people think it's time to review. I mean, it's not necessary. It doesn't say that it.
Can I remind everybody that in our administrative policy manual, we also added, which we did not do this, but that when you're reviewing the executive director annually, that you review, that we added that because of this concern that we review the attorney services at that time. So I would think that that should cover that.
But we did
for the legal services.
And I'm not picking on legal.
I know, we're picking on legal right now because.
Sorry, Dirk.
Yeah.
I just think maybe we could do some research into best practices around review of financial services, bond services and other professional services, just so that the board has some structure around, hey, every 3 years, we're going to actually have a discussion, right? Do we want to go out to RFP? Instead of kind of leaving it to maybe the dynamics of the board at that particular point in time. That would just be my recommendation. If we're revisiting this policy, it might be a good time to just review other best practices.
I agree with Commissioner Harrington and Commissioner Grau. And also, I just want to say that I feel like the way it was reworded is on the legal counsel section on 49 is awkward. I wonder if there's like a better way that could be massaged, because it reads a little odd.
So I will work on that. It should certainly be consistent with what's in the administrative policy. First of all, it was intended to try to match up with what the current practice has been. So I will work on that and getting some best practices and suggested additions for financial services and parameters for those reviews. Commissioner Leach?
Yeah, so the only thing I might suggest, I think I'm going to take a counter position to the other commissioners.
I don't think the mic's on.
Yeah, I got it. So I'm going to take a counter position to my fellow commissioners on this piece. I think in my 4 years now on the board, as Commissioner Harrington did say, though, we've done an outstanding job of reviewing and actually changing service providers since then. And what I would probably suggest and/or remind or reiterate for the board, especially in the fact of President Coyne's eloquent meeting kickoff with, we got an election underway that's still not quite finished. We're going to have new members coming on board, and policies are, I believe, the discretion of the board. And while that sends around legal might be somewhat awkward, the board with a majority can do basically anything they want. So I do appreciate the wisdom of Commissioner Harrington, but the guidance to me is really up to the majority of the board. So that's the only thing I might suggest. I know things over my term has been brought up. What about guidance for certain type of funds? What about guidance relative to certain type of projects everybody has? But I would just suggest relative to this piece, this seems to be one of the least necessary pieces as a commissioner, in my opinion, that we have to deal with. Because of, again, I would give kudos to the past presidents in my term that have successfully looked at these professional services and made, I think, very appropriate and warranted changes. So that's my 2 cents.
I actually don't think that those two things are counter. I think the board can certainly come in when they recognize that there might be an issue during, prior to, let's use Commissioner Harrington's 3-year example. Certainly, if a new board came in here right now and said, we don't like that Dirk guy, they could certainly decide to do a review. Further, if we did have it on a 3-year period and it was time for a review, that review doesn't necessarily mean, all it means is that a task force or a committee would be formed and they would look at it and say, and they might say, no, we really like that Dirk guy, so we're not going to, we're just not going to do any, that's our review. Everything is working fine and we'll just move forward from there. Or they can say, but at least you kind of put it in writing saying, hey guys, for future board, don't forget to take a look at this once in a while. And that's kind of the way I'm viewing what you're saying, and that doesn't in any way really contradict what Commissioner Leach is saying, because certainly if they recognize the problem, the majority of the board would be able to do what they wanted. And so I kind of like the idea if we put in a wording that's, hey, let's take a look at this periodically. I don't see where that handcuffs anybody or limits the power of the board.
We're talking about Sandra, do you understand? I mean, that's clear what services, because these are the major ones. We have several other services, lawn care service, that are under the.
My understanding is we're talking, and please somebody jump in and tell me if I'm not getting this right, is that we're talking about this section that starts on page 48, professional services policy on selection.
Got it.
And when we're talking about professional services, it's these things that we've included, and we would want to look at adding financial advisory services, banking services. Is there anything else that I'm not thinking of?
I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that that's what we're discussing is professional services.
Yeah, bond underwriting, I think I hit her bond selection.
Naturally during budget time, we look at lawn services, things like that. That conversation comes up, right? Are we happy with our lawn care service?
Right.
What's our budget? But I think over time, some of these other services that aren't looked at in that same granular budget lens, it's just a nice tickler. Like President Coyne said, it's not mutually exclusive of board authority at any time to come in and look at any service line. But I know that just judging by how some of the relationships and services that had been performed for many, many years, maybe it's a good tickler for the board as iterations change and people change to say, hey, wait, do we want to look at that as a board? It's just a good reminder. I don't know how we tie that in.
Yeah, and the board that's part of
our role and our authority.
Purview. Right, exactly.
I would like to suggest, though, to Gail's point, that maybe, Sandra, you'd cross-reference the administrative policy, because I'd like to know annually if, we're rowing the same way and everything's okay with legal services. I'm not afraid of a review. In fact, I'd like it. And you kicked me out of Gail's review, so I felt bad about that. So I think the annual check-in, frankly, on legal's performance when you're doing, the executive director. I mean, I work for her in a sense, and I also work for the board. So maybe if you cross-reference it, that we'll do that going forward. We'll make sure we check in annually, and then if you've got the 3-year, more comprehensive review, that's great too.
Makes sense.
Certainly would have given us a lot more to talk about in that.
Commissioner O'Donnell, just talk.
I wasn't sure, President Coyne, if this is where you were going. Would it be better, as opposed to, we're talking at the policy level here, and would it make more sense at the policy level to just say that, make a general statement that we'll review these things periodically as determined by the board, or something like that, as opposed to nailing it down? Well, we're going to do this every 3 years, and we're going to do this every 3 years. That just strikes me as being a little restrictive.
My point was to not restrict it, but really my point was that by putting a time frame on it, we remind future boards to look at it. The idea that putting in and we will do this periodically is fine, but I think that that's pretty vague and too easily passed up. And what I kind of vision in my head is that somebody on staff who organizes all the meetings and stuff all the time is going to say, don't forget, President whoever, you have to review this policy. You have to do this because we're on the 5 years or 3 years or whatever it is. That's what I was thinking. But I'm certainly not trying to restrict any future board or the present board into what they do. In fact, I'm just trying to give them guidance so that when they step in, they know that this is something that they need to do periodically. And like you said, periodically, but I think if you put a set date on it, it makes it much clearer and more important that we can't just pass by it and say, oh yeah, it's in the policy manual, but we don't really want to deal with it right now. So
I think you make an intentional decision of whether it needs to be reviewed or not, but you're deciding that. You're not just letting it slide.
exactly. Thank you, Commissioner Grau. That's exactly what I was trying to say. You did it much more succinctly.
Okay,
Any
so
other
if I'm hearing this
discussion?
right, we should set a time parameter at which we're going to decide whether we need to go through a selection process.
Well, before you cast that in stone, I won't be around. It's finalized, but I would suggest that you adopt Superintendent Mountcastle's suggestion that you get some input relative to best practices in other
Oh, yeah.
agencies.
I have a whole lot of policies that yeah, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you're wishing I would have contacted you this week, huh?
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Any other input on the, yeah, this is not the section that I was imagining I'd have questions on, but that's great.
Yeah, I'm glad Harmony brought it up because I had questions specifically about the lawyer because we had talked about it in the past. I have two things. One is I thought we would make it 1 year without doing policies, but you got us. And two,
because I'm derelict in getting these done.
Well, you had excuses. I think it's on page 43. And I was looking at the red line version. You changed, we have two directors that report to Gail, right? Margaret and
Diane.
Diane. Right.
Diane,
And
yes.
somewhere in here it says manager or superintendent, and there's no, is manager like in a generic manager? Because it doesn't say director.
Okay.
It's in.
I have to look through this again because I know in one section I changed it. I started to have director, and we were confused by who that meant. So then I put in their titles because we didn't want it to be confused with the executive director. So
I like under purchasing policy A, the third bullet point, budget items greater than or equal to 5,000.
yes, requires manager.
Yeah, it says manager or director crossed out superintendent. And I was like, well, what's wrong with director?
It should read requires managers, marketing or human resource directors approval.
Yeah, but keep going.
So oops, my apologies. Later on, it should be manager or that
director or superintendent?
No, it should be those same titles.
Okay,
It was not, that was an error. It shouldn't be superintendent. It should be marketing or human resources. Or
okay,
human resource directors. So the intent is that managers or those two directors have
Right.
up to that level. And then
Okay.
superintendents are the next level. So thank you for catching that.
there might have been one other place where that happened. I don't remember. But it was on that page, so you'll see it if it's there.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I will double check that. Any other thoughts, comments?
It's thankless work, but thank you for doing it.
Well, we're really excited about moving forward with the purchasing card, and I thought it was really important that we get these approval levels updated and, all these other areas, needed looking at, and appreciate the board's input. So I will make the revisions we talked about, and we can have further discussion and or action at the next meeting.
I'm sorry, I had one further question around the vendor selection. I'm wondering if I'm getting to what you thought we'd have questions on. The vendor selection competitiveness area and the addition of environmental, human, and social capital factors. I'm assuming this isn't required by any state law or act, rather it's kind of a decision of policy for our district. Can you share
That's
a little
correct.
bit about the addition?
Yeah, so I put a lot of notes on the side of this to sort of explain my thinking on it, and I'm happy to, get the board's input. So none of this is required by statute, and so my thought was that adding these considerations, it provides the opportunity to reflect the district's values by allowing additional flexibility in vendor selection, so that when we're looking at criteria, when we're requiring vendor quotes, that these factors may be cited as rationale for choosing a particular vendor, as long as the cost is, within budget.
I appreciate that. And I just wanted to point it out to the board that that's kind of like a moral compass of consideration sorts. I am very supportive of that language, but wanted to kind of just highlight that.
Yeah, I wasn't kind of sure how to go with it. I thought I'd take a whack at it and see what people thought of it.
I love
They are
that.
considerations. Yeah, they don't tie decisioning, but good perspective, I'd say, in how we kind of think through vendors.
Melissa Halting. Oh, sorry. Melissa Halting in the audience would like to speak if there's an opportunity. Let me know.
Can we finish the board first or no?
Yeah, we should.
I wanted to say I thank you for bringing that up, Harmony. I read that and I was pleased. A group in town that's talking about sustainability was wondering about this type of purchasing process, and it's flexible, so it's not mandatory, but it's it allows the ability to consider things that other than price. So I'm happy. I was really happy to see it.
Great.
So I just have a question because my small business in my life, I don't have to deal with vendors in the same way that this body does and this organization does. But so under the human and social capital considerations, vendors are able to demonstrate a commitment to factors such as diversity, et cetera, how are they, so what questions are we asking them to demonstrate? I mean, and how do they demonstrate that? And further, where's the bar by which we decide that they've cleared? Where does the board set that? So, you know, if a vendor comes to us and says, well, here's our list of, here's our statement of inclusionary practice, and you go, well, it's not good enough, even though the next board might have said it's perfectly good. I mean, I'm a little concerned about how vendors and how we're going to sort of police that if we put it into policy. How do we verify that a vendor is going to? How do we get them to demonstrate a commitment? I mean, they can write a statement that mirrors this, but they could do that because they know they have to do it. It doesn't. I'm a little confused as how we police that. I'm not saying, of course, and I want to be on record as saying I'm not saying that we should dismiss the whole thing entirely. I just don't know the logistics of how that works, and maybe people that work for bigger companies that have vendors, you know, they can chime in here and kind of enlighten me. But I'm personally just a little confused as to how we verify that. It's a nice statement, but I don't know how we verify it.
Well, I can take a crack at it. So right now with bigger grants, we have to include in there a component for demonstration that they're able to recruit and use or are MBE, WBE, veteran-owned business, you know, owned by a person with a disability, those kinds of things. And those are certifications that are obtained from third parties. So we're not having to decide whether or not they've got that status. They have to do it. There's also built in about how you make a market for that you're committed to trying to get a certain percentage of those kinds of, in the grants this is, a certain percentage of those kinds of businesses as subcontractors, or a certain percentage of the contract goes to those. And where that's appropriate, we put it in the contract and we evaluate the person against it. But in general, for us, it's going to be, well, even if you don't have them, did you make a market? So the question we ask the vendors typically is, what kind of market did you make? What were your efforts to try and create a market for these kinds of things? Those are the standard questions that are asked at the state agency level that are passed on to us in grants. And that's what the procurement team would be looking for. There aren't magic numbers because they're not always achievable. In some markets, there aren't enough, say it's a concrete project for Superintendent Wolf, there aren't enough minority suppliers of concrete to go around. So we look at the market, we ask them those questions, and we evaluate from there. So trying to put in hard and fast performance specifications or rules, the state tried it, it didn't work. And so we're following the state's lead here in how you evaluate when that's appropriate to do.
So, yeah, thank you, Dirk. I would just add, you know, when it comes to selecting vendors for purchases that aren't coming to the board, we may not always have relevant information to make a decision based on these considerations. But the policy, you know, allows us to cite those if we do have that information when we're asking for, you know, if it's over a certain purchase threshold and we need to have quotes, that can be cited if we do have relevant information and that it's within budget, that could be cited as part of the rationale for choosing that vendor, not just on price. Does that help?
Well, that clears. Yes, it does. It helps me. Like I said, I wasn't really objecting to the wording. I just want to make sure it was clear, and I think you both made that very clear to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent DeAngelis, for all the work on this. I know it was a big undertaking, so thank you, and I appreciate it. Is there any more board input before we turn it over?
Okay, since there's no more board input, are you ready to hear the public comment? Yes.
Yes, please.
Melissa, I've unmuted you. You could unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, thanks for bringing up I was happy to see the environmentally preferable purchasing section in here when I was reviewing the packet. And I just had Commissioner Coyne, I do think I understand your concerns, and what really matters is how this is operationalized, right? So if everything's a tie, we consider these other things. And looking at other environmentally, these sorts of policies, some of them have language about balancing environmental and fiscal responsibility. And there's other types of language that can be put in to make sure that these are all handled, that there's a balance in how these different factors are considered. But I had just a slight edit for the first bullet about products. The first bullet in the different factors that should be considered talks about products that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and or are used or are made using renewable energy. And it's how you define that. I mean, products that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, is that reduced greenhouse gas emissions when they're made, when they're used, when they're disposed? So I found a wording in another policy that I really like, and I can email the language in. It's products that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their production, shipping, use, and discard. And that kind of considers the total life cycle of the product that you're purchasing, and it's a pretty simple change. So, and using renewable energy will also reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so you really don't need both in that bullet. So I can email that in for consideration. Otherwise, I thought the language looked pretty good, and some of these policies that are out there are really, really, really long, and I thought what you had in there was concise in its wording and covered all the bases. So that's all I have, but thanks for putting it in there, and it's good to have it so it can be considered in addition to price and other things. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate them. I will now turn over the floor to Intergovernmental Liaison, Commissioner Ledoux.
And I have nothing right now. So
On to communications and correspondence.
Just to mention that we got the Power Play grant. It's $1,000. It's an IAPD program, and it's for promoting the Illinois, the Park District Youth License Plate. And so that the funds for the license plates goes into youth programs throughout the state. So kudos to Amy Kopecki, who put this application in, and we'll use it toward Beyond the Bell.
Awesome, thank you.
Yay.
Any new business? Okay, I move to adjourn to closed meeting for the purpose to discuss collective negotiating matters 2C2. We will reconvene to open session to approve the collective bargaining agreement.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
yes.
Commissioner Coyne.
Aye.
Want to leave? Oh, okay. I just paused. I thought you just hit something. Leave weapon.
Mary and Jim, can you hear us from the boardroom?
Okay, I can now. I couldn't before, but I can now.
I can hear you, Mary Ann, but I'm not hearing anybody else.
Testing.
Oh,
Hello?
I told them they had to be quiet, so
Got
they
it.
were listening, actually.
We got
I
shush.
can hear them all.
Okay.
No camera, but we can hear 'em.
We are in a meeting right now, so
We are reconvened.
Yeah.
So everybody seems to be back. So I move to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the Park Ridge Park District and the Service Employees International Union to expire on February 15th, 2024, pending union ratification, and to authorize the president and secretary to execute and deliver the agreement. This action will be formally ratified at an actual board meeting with physical presence at a later date.
Second.
Please, any discussion? Please call the roll.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne.
Aye. Motion carried. I move to adjourn the meeting of the Board of Park Commissioners.
Second.
Second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Tunnel,
Yes.
Commissioner Grau,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne.
Aye. We stand adjourned.
Night. Thanks, everybody.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night. Good night.
Night.